While testing a product is just not about executing test cases, but also to find good number of defects, which also justifies that your test cases were very efficient in order to find the anomalies and the deviations from the expectations or requirements in a particular product. Thus, one of the major objectives of testing is also to find defects while testing the product. So testing is just not limited when it comes to preparing test cases or test script using automation and executing them simply to say that everything is working fine. It's more of like the testers must have the intentions to find defects and prove that the system does not work or probably have a lot of defects which we need to rectify before the product can reach into the market. And that's what we will be discussing in more detail today, that what exactly a defect is and what's the life cycle of a defect and related artifacts of the same. Hello friends and greetings for the day. Welcome back to another episode of Testing in a Nutshell. This is Neeraj Kumar Singh and today we are talking about the defects in software testing. A very basic and generic definition given to defect is it is a deviation between the expected and actual results. So when we write test cases or probably the test script, it all depends on manual or automation, whatever you're following in order to test the application. We do have certain expected results which are defined as a part of these instructions. And when we execute the same thing on the product, there might be possibilities that these may meet the expected outcomes as actual, or sometimes it might be different between when it comes to expected and actual. So this difference between expected and actual is what you call it as a defect. But not always these deviations can be configured or can be captured as a defect. Sometimes it might be due to an external constraint. Now when you say external constraint, like the deviations on the environment, maybe probably the test data which you're trying to use, or maybe certain prerequisite which you did not consider properly. So it might be even due to misunderstanding of a requirement and you thought the feature should work like this. So being a tester, it is very important for all of you to observe that what anomalies you have actually observed. And as a part of it, you need to basically determine that is that really a defect or my misunderstanding. That's where generally a tester has the right to report a defect but does not open a defect. So a lot of organization practices this approach and follows the one part of the defect tracking lifecycle that a tester reports a defect with a status new, and the new defect has to be approved by a superior in the organization from the testing team. That if the defect was really a defect or it was probably a misunderstanding of the tester or maybe due to any external constraint. Thus, once verified and evaluated, the defect will be moved to open state. So that's one thing very important to know. But is that defect is only limited to the unit testing, integration system or any other level? No team. When it comes to defect can be found at any point of the entire development lifecycle. So we have understood in our previous videos that there is something called as static testing and dynamic testing. When we talk about static testing, it's all about the documentation and the work product review. But yes, we do find defects there as well. So defects are just not limited to an application, testing, or just limited to executing certain levels of testing. It is equally important that you find the defects in the static approach as well. So when you talk about requirements review, you talk about design review, code reviews, artifact reviews, any such review is also in order to test the static documents. And there also we can find a lot of defects in order to find defects early in the life cycle so that the defects can be found much earlier and does not propagate further into the codes. Thus, we say that defects are just not limited to dynamic testing or any specific level of testing. So defects can be found anywhere throughout the development lifecycle, be it requirement gathering, design creations, code reviews, or in fact your dynamic testing. So yes, defects can be found anywhere. When it comes to dynamic testing, we do have functionals and non-functionals. The defects are different for different levels of testing. We need to understand, being a tester, that when it comes to functional levels of testing like unit, integration, system, acceptance, and all kind of things, these are directly related to the functionality or a particular feature or a program of an application. Further, when you talk about the non-functional testing, the defects are slightly different than that. That means the performance defects, security defects, recovery defects, usability defects. These are all quality characteristics of an application, and the defects are different in their own way. For example, if I talk about performance testing, the defect could be the response time is higher than the 5 seconds as per the expectations. Similarly, security, it should authenticate the valid users or send you an OTP when doing a transaction and OTP is not received. So that's another defect for a security point of view. So now, as you understand slightly here, that the defects are different when we test functionality and non-functionality. Now let's talk about the defect report. Generally, a defect report includes a lot of details which need to be provided by a tester while reporting the defect. So basic information includes the unique identification number, a summary about the defect or what exactly it is. Following that, you can talk about the test environment in which you got it. You can even tag the test case which you tried with, like what instructions you were trying to do when you got this defect, so that it can be helpful for the other stakeholders to reproduce it. And you can also talk about reproducibility clause, that whether this defect will appear again or not. So there are a lot of such things which you generally mention. Equally, the status, or you talk about like when you are expecting it to be resolved, probably suggestions as what do you think could be the reason for that. Because when you talk about agile environment, testers are equally aware of how exactly defects happen. And maybe the test data and all those things, what you think you have tried entirely in order to get that defect should be attached as a part of defect details or defect report. And as the defect process or moves into the life cycle of a defect, slowly the other details will also be added. For example, what was the main reason behind that root cause? What steps developer take to fix that issue? What would be the areas which you need to do regression testing for as a change of this program? What was the step taken by the developer to resolve the issue? Was that a code change? Was that a modification of a program or replacement of a code completely, or just disabling certain functionalities? So yes, we analyze everything there, and based on that we perform retesting, that is confirmation testing, and regression as a global impact on the application. That's not all. When you talk about the defect tracking lifecycle, which is also known as bug lifecycle commonly in many organizations, so it has a lifecycle which has different status of the defect. It starts with a journey of new, then it comes to open to assigned. Assigned means that the defect is now assigned to a developer, and developer is working on that. Now when the developer gets assigned with a defect, the developer has a choice to give different options or different status to a defect depending on the defect type. For example, if we talk about the defect which are accepted and analyzed and can be resolved, or maybe having higher priority to be resolved at the earliest, the developer will fix the issue and change the status to resolved. What if the defect cannot be resolved at the moment? And then we call it as deferred. So the status will be marked as deferred, that we do accept the defect, but due to lack of information or probably due to higher priority works, we will be pushing this defect to later versions. And probably sometime the defect does not exist for the developers, and we say rejected. So every organization may have different status to further customize their own way of working. Once resolved, definitely the tester will conduct confirmation testing to make sure that it is up to the mark and the defect is now resolved. Once resolved, retesting passes, you move to regression to check that there is any kind of adverse effect due to this fixing of the defect. And then we check that other parts are still working fine. Once resolved, you ask your development or testing lead to verify your retesting as well, because you were not the one who alone opened the defect. Someone was verifying your defect to open that further. Thus, you involve that person once again to close the defect. And the test lead or maybe the test manager of the organization will finally close the defect. Now that's how the life cycle of defect goes. What if the developers had tried doing something and the defect is not resolved. You reopen it. Now you reopen it, it goes back to the open state and gets assigned to the developer once again. So this cycle may continue until unless your defect is finally resolved or mutually the development and the testing teams agree to one condition. And that's how the defect story is all about to understand. So I think today we have explored a very good understanding on defect, what exactly defect is, where all defects can be found, and it's just not limited to dynamic testing. It can be found in static as well, like work products. And also the defects are different for functional and non-functional testing. You may need different details to be added when reporting such defects. And of course, the defect tracking lifecycle, which is very important to understand the lifecycle of a defect when working in any organizations. So that's all from this particular tutorial team. I hope you really enjoyed understanding more about the defects in a nutshell. So we will be getting back to you with another interesting tutorial like this about testing and concepts. So stay tuned for that. Till then, keep learning, keep exploring, keep understanding the context. Thanks for watching the video team and happy learning.